salary should go on a grant. There is no actual formula, but there is some guidelines, okay? It depends if it's a small grant versus a large grant. It's depending if it's a federal grant or a non-federal grant, or if it's internal. So federal versus non-federal. So there's a lot of specific rules for non-federal, like American Heart Association or ACS. They have limits. They might say, okay, $40,000 or this much for fringe. So we have to abide by those. So you figure out whatever effort would make up to 40% of the PI salary, and if it says only so much fringe, then we only use that fringe, and we cost share the rest. And you're going to hear me saying cost share is bad, and it is, but sometimes it's required. Now, if it's a federal grant, they don't require a certain amount of effort, but the School of Medicine actually came out with some numbers that's on the second page that I'll discuss in a minute. So they'd like to see some particular portion of grants covered by PIs on federal awards. Again, if it's small or large, if you're doing an R03 or an R21 and it's federal, you want to do 5 or 10%. If you're only getting 50,000 or 100,000, then the effort and the salary should be commensurate with what you're bringing in. You can't ask for 30% effort and have nothing left for your staff or to do the job. However, if you're going to submit for an R01 and you're going to get $250,000 or more, you should be putting 25 or 30% effort on those grants. And when I say commitment or salary, I mean you ask for it and you actually charge it to your salary or pay it towards your salary. The current NIH cap is $189,600. This usually changes every January. It hasn't changed so much under Trump, no surprise. So there is a limit to what NIH can pay their doctors, their faculty and whatever. So the rest of the world can't get paid more than what NIH is paying their staff. So they put out this annual notice every year, and that number goes up and sometimes goes down. We were actually up to $199,600, and then a couple years ago it fell back by 20 grand. So we're kind of slowly climbing back up. So it's important to know annually what that number is. The salary also, as I said above, kind of depends on the agency. So if they put limits, some of them say no salary. They just want to pay for the staff and the supplies and whatever to do the job. And so in that case, we do have to cost share, or you simply, don't put effort on that grant. So the salary effort you put in your budget is your commitment. So that number you're held to. RSP keeps records of that number for the PI at least. So, if you say in a budget and you submit it, I'm going to put 25% effort, that number doesn't disappear, and then suddenly you're funded, and then say, I'm going to put 15% effort on the grant. You wrote in a document that was submitted and funded at a different number, and that's the number we have to follow through until we do paperwork to change it. So NIH did put out a policy some years ago that they're looking to have PIs cover themselves roughly 50 to 55% on grants. So if you're submitting that first R01, it's recommended that the PI salary goes in on that budget, on that grant for 30%. And when I say second R01, I don't mean the continuation. I don't mean a grant has been available for 5 years and now it's going back in. I mean, I'm referring to a real second grant, a different title, a different question and whatever. So that if both are funded, I should say when and not if, that you'll be at 55% funding, or the PI will be at 55% funding. So what about everybody else? Okay, so you have your co-Is and your collaborators. And those of you who took the fall class, I harp on this to say co-Is and collaborators are the same to NIH. So some PIs make a big deal. I want these 2 people to be co-investigators. I want these 3 people to be collaborators. They don't mean anything different. They mean the same thing. They're the same title. It's a title that needs to be paid. So if you call somebody a co-I or collaborator, you need to be paying them. If you're not going to pay them, then they should be either a consultant, which is somebody from outside the UW, or internally we call them an other significant contributor. So those are important terms. And then you give people on your grant, and they can be either subcontracts or they could be vendors. And so those are for people from outside. Subcontract means we're giving them overhead, and we feel that they're scientifically significant to the grant. So, we hold them to a higher position in the grant, and so we're going to pay them overheads and a bigger amount of money. So then a vendor is somebody who's just basically going to run supplies. Or they're just doing a little something, or you're buying something from them or whatever. So we're just going to pay them like we would any other vendor at the university. We'd get a PO, they'd invoice us, we'd submit a PO and pay them. We don't have to put a lot of paperwork in the grant in advance, and I'll do some details of that later on in this course. And then supplies. NIH kind of gives this number, this global number to use in budgets. So they say somewhere $18,000, $20,000. It might be a little higher now per FTE. So if you run down your budget and you've put in there 2.5 people, when you add everybody up total, you know that you need something for 2.5 people. You should have like $50,000 of animals and supplies, because if you have that many people, some work has to be done. So if you put in $5,000 for supplies, yet you have 2.5 people quoted in your budget, it's like, unless it's all just, just sit in the office and collect data. I mean, if there's some lab somehow involved with animals or whatever, you're going to need the supply dollar. So it gives you that rough number to kind of estimate, to figure out what you should have in your budget. And it doesn't mean you're limited to that. It's just, kind of like basic standards. Okay, so here's a new concept. So MOUs. So MOUs are required by NIH if a PI is faculty who works both with the VA and at the UW. It involves a cover letter, which we get signed off once a year, and it's good for the whole year. And you'll see a copy of that in a minute. And then a confusing fact is that the School of Medicine has decided that officially the PIs work 50 hours on our side, on the UW. They can work more, and we claim there's no denominator. But for this purpose, for the math, we say 50. And the VA works 40 hours. So therefore, when we talk about eighths, 1/8 is worth 5 hours, not 1/8 of the VA time. So that means 5/8 is then 50%. So people always wondered how somebody could have 5/8 VA time and have a 50% leave of absence. This is it. This is the definition. So, don't ask for all the details, just accept this as fact. So we're 50, they're 40, and so that's how the hours calculate out. All right. So this is out of the grants policy statement. This is 17.3, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it basically says investigators with joint appointments at the VA and the university require an MOU. And it defines that it needs a letter saying who that PI is, what they do for the VA, what's their role, how much research is supposed to be in there. And then every time you submit a grant, you have to submit a spreadsheet which is updated for each of those grants, accounting for that VA time and the university time, to show 100% of their time. And that 100%, we calculate using the institutional base salary. So if the PI really has a rate of $100,000, but they have a 50% leave of absence, we're going to use an institutional base salary for this calculation of $50,000, which is half the UW portion. I'm going to show you the numbers, so it's going to make a little more sense. And then all of this together is called, I thought it was in bold here somewhere. Anyway, I have it on the spreadsheet. Pardon?
The institutional base, that one's bolded.
Someplace I'm trying to say professional effort, but I'm not seeing it. So anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. So this is a sample of a letter. Here we were signing it in July, which is the beginning of our fiscal year, and it's good for the whole year. So now Sarah's doing these, and so once a year, Sarah will take these, she'll update them for the people in ID that have MOUs, that have VA time, and then, we kind of underlined a little bit, 6H, which this is already outdated. Nasia's title, she's an infectious disease. This middle paragraph is probably, the most of, what she's doing or whatever, or this little line up here. After this line, after her name, all the rest is standard form. There's nothing else new, and then there's 4 signatures. So it's Alan Bridges for the VA, the PI would sign, I can sign off for the chair. They have no idea of what this has evolved, so since I approve these and fill out the spreadsheets, it's just better to come to me. And then Debbie Meltzer signs off for the dean's office. I'm sorry, I got an echo in my ear. So again, once a year, pretty simple, just kind of fill in where it's a little bit underlined, and you can kind of see what's particular to the PI. All right, so then this is a 3-page spreadsheet. So basically you look at Wisdom, not Whisper, Wisdom, to see what grants that PI has, and then maybe their salary to see what the effort is on each of those. So, and you can put in here if they're mentors or whatever and have no effort, but obviously it's not going to change the numbers on this. So I have a tendency to put what's funded versus what not funded, but if you want to make it complete, you can add those other grants in here. Like here, there's a no-cost extension and an R01 that ended. I just left them in there, but the only thing funded right now is Dr. Mather on this R21 no-cost extension. I usually put a dash and put the effort here. So like he's got 50 hours up here, so I think this was 17% off the top of my head, or 15%. So then I could do the math and multiply the effort of 15 or 17% times the 50, and that would tell me how many hours to fill in. We used to have a column for UWMF, but in the last few years with effort reporting and whatever, it was decided that really what we're doing is figuring out the time between the VA and the UW. And but when the PIs do their clinical work, it's off the foundation, it's paid off the foundation. So for this purpose, it's not we don't deal with that for effort reporting, we're not dealing with it for this anymore either, because it just doesn't make the numbers work. So here you've got 50 hours, and so this person has 1/8. Okay, so that means that's 5 hours VA time. So that means 5 hours have to show up in the VA column, and then the balance of those 50 hours have to show up on the UW side. So then you start to fill in. You can talk to them a little bit, figure out, if it's all research or they're doing any teaching or whatever. Jay started this one and then I updated it. So she told me 12 hours, so I left it there. I put in the correct hours for the R21, and then I just assumed, because I know he does a lot of research, that everything else was unfunded research. Again, unless they're doing a lot of administration, I might put 1 or 2 here because they're doing something with committees or whatever. But I don't put anything clinically on this form anymore, unless I know that there's something that's really part of the, that they get paid a certain way from one of the internal accounts that would put them clinically on our side. Otherwise, I just keep the foundation and the clinical all 0, and then just fill this in with the actual time of the grants, and then unfunded research, a little teaching, and a little administration. So anyway, we put then 5 hours for clinical at the VA, and then we set them up this way for the UW, and we got the 45 hours to come up here and the 5 hours for the VA. So now in the middle, it shows up in percentage. Come on. So you don't touch this. This just fills in from the numbers above. So we know his FTE is 90%. So he's got 1/8 VA, and so his FTE here on our side is 90%. That means 2/8. That's 10 hours, right? I did do this wrong.
I thought 1/8 is 10%. Because if they're 5/8, they're 50%.
Oh yeah, 5 of 50 hours. Got it, okay. So then this is correct. So he's got a 0.9 FTE, and so this is 100% total professional effort. That's the word I was looking off that policy statement to show up. So this should show up with the 90% FTE being correct. So that should be what we should see in the payroll system. So once that's correct, you just go to the 3rd page, and then you put in a title, the day it's due, who's the PI. Now, if he has no funding available, you have to say where that funding is going to come for this grant, whether it's going to replace something that's almost ending or just going to come from unfunded research or whatever. And then you put the effort here. This will fill this cell. So then he's putting on 5% effort, and he's got a 0.9 FTE, which means his payroll, the amount of money you're going to put on the budget, is 6%. So this is line 40. I'm not showing line 40 here, but this is the magic line of why we do this whole thing, because this tells us how much then to take off on the budget. So his effort would still be 5%, but on the budget sheet, you would actually put in the salary level for 6%, not 5%. That is an MOU. So then to the justification, we have to add in a line that explains what we've done. So for this particular MOU that I showed you, it would say that 0.6 calendar months or 5% effort on a 0.9 FTE payrolls is 6%. So that should be right after the person's name and their title or whatever in the justification line. And then we have a lot of PIs that are 50%, so I put a line in there for the 50%, excuse me, for like Dr. Astana. So 1.2 calendar months or 10% effort on a 0.5 FTE, payrolls is 20%. And so this is incorrect, that should be 1/8, and then 5/8 then is 50%. So then this takes us to effort. So effort rule number 1, 100% is 100%, although for some people this is changing, but let's leave it at 100% for now. So you cannot have greater than 100%. It used to be if you were paid more than 100% off of federal dollars, you went to jail. So we have to be careful because the VA is an odd percentage, and we're calculating and keeping track of the UW side. We have to be careful that we don't get over 100. And then any title above a postdoc cannot be paid over 100% on federal dollars, such as faculty, scientists, lab managers. So like a lab manager, for instance, might be paid off of one grant, but she may be doing ordering supplies for all the grants or all the students or whatever. So therefore, a portion of what that lab manager is doing is beyond the scope of that one grant. So she shouldn't be paid from one grant to do everything. Scientists, they may be working on the next grant. They may be sitting in the library looking up articles or reading publications, not for the work they're doing now, but for the work of the future. Well, you're not supposed to pay for future grants off of a current grant. So those are the kind of tasks that we have to be careful of and make sure people are not paid 100% off of federal dollars. So PIs in particular, I like to make sure they're capped at like 90 to 100%, so that we're comfortable that they have those extra tasks not being paid on grants. Cost sharing is not allowed. It's a rule of the School of Medicine. DOM follows it. I enforce this to a great extent. There's some exemptions, like I said, with the agencies, but they don't happen all the time, and those we have to allow for, just like a training grant. Training grants do not allow for the PIs to be paid. They have to have 5% effort on there. That's just something we have to cost share, and there's no questions asked. It's just not available on the training grant to pay them. And for like giving the example here that I did before, that American Heart has a salary limit. Some grants have no salary on them. So what is cost sharing? It's the portion of the total cost of a sponsored project that's being paid by the UW. Cost share effort is any work that should be on the grant and the university's paying for. So paid effort means the effort which is being paid on a grant, and then cost share is the over. So if a person, PI, puts 30% effort commitment on a grant, and then he says only pay me 20, he's looking to have 10% cost shared. If he's out of money and we have to do it and the chair is going to pay him or whatever, there are situations where we do it, but if the money's there and it was requested in the budget, it should be paid for. Effort should equal salary. So one of the issues we have is with other departments, like engineering, for instance, will say, we want to have, Dr. X for 10% of his effort on this grant, but we're not going to pay him. Why should we have our PI working on that grant to benefit engineering, at our cost? Maybe back in the ivory tower, 15 years ago, things like that could happen. But now we have to worry about how that 10% salary for the PI is being covered. So this is where the other significant contributor title fits in. So if that other department wants that person, then it's got to be an insignificant amount, and they can participate. They can have his bio sketch and bump up their grant. But if they really want them to work on it, then they really have to have them paid on that grant. So no cost sharing to other departments. So effort basics. Effort is your work on a project, whether or not the sponsor pays you. Well, of course, we know we want them to pay us. When you write yourself into a proposal, you are committing effort to the sponsor, similar to what you're going to put on your other support page. Therefore, for effort reporting, time commitment on a grant, effort reporting is equal time on a grant, and effort is equal to salary. So, you know, if you're going to put on 20%, we want to be paid 20%. Okay, so the university likes to talk about effort as a pie. So I actually found some pie pictures and thought it might help the situation. Okay, so it's real easy if you work here 100%, okay? If you have a 1 FTE, you know your UW pie is a whole pie, okay? You work 100% here, you know, everything you do is part of the UW. So what if you only work here 0.5 FTE? Well, when we're talking about effort, your time at the UW is still a whole pie, okay? So you may personally split your time at 2 places and have 2 different tasks, you know, at these places. But when we do effort reporting, we still have to think about your role at the UW is 100%, okay? Same with even 0.5 FTE. So we have many students that work on campus, and when they're paid on a grant off of a T32 or whatever, they don't have to do effort on that part. But we sometimes pay them 5 or 6% extra in addition to that training grant. So now their role, their job at the UW is only 0.5 or 0.6%. So now for effort reporting, their job, their role at the UW, even though they're a student for most of the hours of the week, whatever role they do outside of the T32 is 100% effort. So everybody gets very confused because they say, well, you know, it was only 5%. Why am I certifying 100? It's because your effort, the part of the UW portion, is still 100% effort. We got that? The whole pie really helps. Okay, so the pie you have is 100%. We got it. But it can be paid different ways. So when you're doing effort reporting, now people are confused because they have a little portion, you know, but PIs may still have to divide that money up. So even though their effort's 100%, they might see it being paid on multiple sources. So they need to know from the PI and the administrators need to communicate with everybody how they are being paid, okay? So one of the things I get all the time is somebody opens their effort report and they see 3 grants. And it says on there you're paid 50%, 25%, and 25%. And that person says, no, I work on them all the same. And he changes them to 33, 33, 33. Well, it's their opinion of how they're working versus what the PI and the administrator have discussed. And we have to have you certify how you're paid. So that person has to talk to their PI. And if they really feel like they're doing 33, 33, 33, then they have to make some payroll changes. But if the PI says, no, I've assigned you tasks and it's really 50, 25, 25, you know, that student or research associate or whatever needs to know so that they go back and they certify the 50, 25, 25, okay? Because when it comes to me, I can only approve what they were paid. So that's my challenge. That's the problem being an effort coordinator. Because when it comes down to this breakdown, people don't necessarily agree and they want to change everything. So for 2 different funds paying the same half-time person, so again, for effort, you know, even though on that pie, to them, only half-time, half-time. For effort reporting, again, those numbers get doubled. So I have trouble with the faculty in geriatrics. They're a 0.5 FTE. They figure, okay, you know, I'm paid on this grant 20%, this grant 20%, and this grant 10%, but then I have them certifying 40, 40, and 20 because they had to double those effort numbers. And they argue with me, you know, that my effort was only 20%. And I say, you know, it is for the 0.5 FTE, but when you know, add it back up to 100% effort, you now have to certify the larger number. So my rule of thumb to everybody is you have a column of effort, of commitment, of payroll, and then some calculations, and then finally where you have to fill in a number. Everybody should just know, pick the larger number of the commitment or the payroll to certify. So if you had a larger commitment, so say you had a 20% commitment, but your grant was running out of money and the administrator only paid you 17, you know, the system might put in 17, you may want to certify 17, but your commitment was the larger number. So I was hoping to go online and show you guys some of these, but I forgot my password. But I brought my phone to authenticate. But anyway, we've got some of those to go through. So effort is the time you spend on an activity expressed as a percentage of all the time of your UW job. Okay, and I think we went through this in the fall class. So what are some of your UW, so this is what your role at the UW is. This does not necessarily mean you can charge a grant. We'll get to that in a minute. So externally sponsored research, university research that's not funded, instruction, any academic effort, administration, service on committees such as the IRB or the animals or whatever, effort extended on preparing proposals. So if you're working on new grants or old grants or progress reports, it's still part of your UW job. Activities related to pursuing intellectual property, public service activities can be part of your UW role, outreach activities, and any paid absences, vacation, sick time, or whatever is considered part of your UW pie. Okay, so things that aren't considered part of your UW job. Consulting outside the UW, clinical activities from the foundation, clinical activities that you might do at the VA, advising activities such as an NIH study section is not part of your role. Peer review of manuscripts, leadership in professional societies, lectures or presentations that are not part of your science. Other special activities resulting in payment. Often drug companies will ask PIs to come and talk about a particular drug that they're interested in promoting because it's in their specialty or whatever and they get paid for that. That is not part of the UW job. And activities over and above or separate from your assigned responsibilities in your primary positions, such as being an editor of a journal. So of those activities that I've just mentioned, which of these can be charged to a grant? Directing or participating in any of the grant or research duties. Providing clinical patient care for a clinical protocol. Writing a progress report for an existing project. Holding a meeting with your lab staff to discuss the research and the project. Activities contributing to and intimately related to the project, such as seminars, consulting with your colleagues, delivering special lectures, attending a scientific conference, reading scientific journals, and mentoring graduate students on this specific research project. I don't think, okay. And what's not? Okay, so I think I've mentioned before, I got burned on this with NCI. So I was an administrator working on the breast board program, and I started working on the new grant that was going to go out. And I had a dog and pony show, and I brought everybody in, and I fed them well. And then the NCI PO came over, and he tapped me on the shoulder. He says, "How are you being paid?" And I says, "Well, off the SPOR, of course." He says, "You can't do all of this and be paid off the existing grant." You know, and he sent me, you know, verse and whatever to show me in writing where this is a fact that you can't be working on the next set of grants or the next grant in any way being paid on the current grant. So I had to go and have all my salary removed from the last 6 months, you know, because I'd been working on the new submission. So, you know, he could have really fined us and whatever, but because I fed him well, you know, he was lenient. But this is a rule and something we have to watch out for. So when they say things like, you know, don't work on the next science, or, you know, administrators aren't supposed to be doing, you know, a lot of your administrators paid on grants aren't supposed to be doing like the basic administration, the basic accounting, you know, reconciling accounts or whatever. That they list certain activities or certain duties that are not paid on federal grants. So here, you know, administration, being a department chair or whatever, obviously you don't get paid on a grant for that. If you're teaching students, you know, in the general school, that's not paid off of a grant. Your clinical activity, except as part of your clinical project. Service on an IRB or other selection committees don't get paid on grants. Any course curriculum, again, that's teaching for the school, and writing textbook chapters cannot be paid off your federal awards. Any questions on that? So then you have effort, you have salary. Now you actually have to do effort reporting. So It's certifying that the university has a means of measuring who's doing what on grants to provide to the sponsors. It needs to show the sources from where you were paid and if there's any cost sharing and how that was paid. And whose effort must be certified? All the faculty, staff, students, and postdocs who are either part of their salary or all of their salary was charged to a project, or if they had committed effort to that project. And certification means you reasonably reflect all the effort for all the activities that's covered from your UW compensation. Effort is not based on a 40-hour work week. So, you know, PIs go home and they're thinking about their research in their shower. That's still part of their 40-hour work week. They're singing in the car and they're planning their research grant out, you know, that's still part of their 40-hour work week. You know, it's late at night and they're reading those scientific journals until they fall asleep. That's still part of their 40-hour work week. So, you know, we ask the people to be professional and try and think of their week and what did they do all week and, you know, how much was on the grant and whatever. So it's our best professional estimate, but again, payroll should be a guide. So how you were paid should be how you certify. If we need to reduce PI effort by more than 25%, it needs to be approved by NIH. So if a PI is putting 30% and for whatever reason they need to go down to 20%, it requires a letter that we must submit before we make the changes internally. So are there limits to total commitments? As I said already, faculty should not be paid more than 100% from sponsored projects. You know, there are plenty of other duties that they have. So we've got to make sure that these other duties are paid from non-federal funding. So academic staff, postdocs, classified staff can be paid 100%, but we have to watch what their job roles are and are they doing anything that's not specific to the grant. And then there's something called de minimis effort. So sometimes we get a grant from an agency or whatever and it's kind of smallish, it's $10,000. So just because we're getting money from that agency, the university likes us to see that we put 1% on there. So it's 1%, it's not going to be paid, and this is going to be allowed by the university because we want to reflect to that sponsor that we had some effort on there. You know, they gave us money, so, you know, the PI is putting effort on there. So there's just some things that are small. So this again would be the other significant contributor kind of category where you've got a collaborator, you want their biosketch in your grant, they're not really doing a lot. You have a question, you run into them in the hallway, you talk to them for a couple minutes, they answer your question. Well, this is all de minimis effort, and that's why we have the title Other Significant Contributor, and it's used.
So wait, did you say that they don't need to actually be paid? Or they will be paid?
For this de minimis, they're not paid.
They're not
So
paid.
we
Okay.
can put
So
on
just
1%.
adding the effort, but it's no money tied to it?
Right.
Okay.
So one area that I don't have on here, maybe I got no cost extension later, I forget. The university keeps changing the rules on us, and this is getting to be a little crazy. But now the university says that if a grant is done and you go into a no cost extension year, I'm sorry, this is killing me. So, so after 5 years, the PI has done all of his commitments. So if he had 20% all 5 years and that's all done, then we can now say in the no cost extension year, they have no effort. So we have money we're still doing, the grant is still going on, but the PI's met his commitment and it's now zero on the books internally at the UW. However, that said, NIH does not like to see that. So if you submit another support page and you say it's in a no cost extension year and you put in zero, they send it back. So we're going to have to play this duality thing right now until we get it all figured out. Internally, if you look them up in our system, you will find that the commitment is made and the PI is at zero. However, for no cost extension period on another support page, we need to show that 1%. So for those who do other support pages, it's not very clean. Okay, so all right, so I can at least show you this page. I was going to sign in, but I can only think of my email password. So we have to do effort reporting, which when you're ready, you click on here, and it will go into the print screens that I'll show you shortly. But there's lookup tools, and there's your training section. So here is my effort tasks. So if you're not sure whether or not you've taken the test before, you can click on my effort tasks and it will show you whether or not you've done your past periods, you just have to do this one or whatever. So I keep getting emails from people saying, well, did I take the test before? This is where you got to go. This is where you find out what you need to do. So I think they should have it more prominent on the page. They don't. But if you just click on My Effort Tasks and log in, it will take you to where you need to go. And then the training. So this class doesn't satisfy for your actual effort training. This is a system that takes maybe 15 minutes that shows you how to go and log into the other thing and actually do your effort reporting. The numbers and whatever we're going over isn't so much part of that training. It's more a how-to of the software. But you have to take that once, over the time period to do effort reporting. So again, on this page that's in your booklet, you should be able to read it up here. I've got it, bolded, so you can, cut and paste it in here if you don't have it already. So the two places that I just want to, there's a tons of other information on here that you'll never need, how-to guides and whatever, go through it if you're interested. But the My Effort Tasks tells you each 6 months what you need to do, and when and if you need training, you come down here. Any questions? Okay. All right, so that's that page. Okay, so once you go and you sign in, it will look like this. And what's cut off here is a little white box where you put in a number. So this is my own. I know I'm supposed to be paid 10%. So this is where you need to talk with your PIs before you do this, or your administrators, to find out, what was your commitment, what is your effort, what should you be paid on a grant. So even at my level, it gets messed up. So I'm not doing mine because we got a salary cost transfer pending, and until I see payroll show up as 10%, I'm not going to put my 10% in, and finish this off. And so, oh, the print screen, sorry, okay. So missing here is a little box after, there's a white box that I would type in a number, and then a little tiny box that gets a check mark. So once I put my 10% here, I will put 90% down here, and then go check, check, and then a box that says certify in green will show up, and then I can click on certify.
So
Okay.
is it okay that salary and effort don't match, or it does need to go back and be adjusted?
So if what you think you should be paid is not correct, you need to talk to the administrator and your PI. So if you think it should be 20% and it's only showing up as 12, then you got to go back and find out to the PI, should I be 20%? Was this changed?
For example, with yours here on Andy's grant, would that need, would you need to fix, would accounting need to do a transfer to fix that?
Yes, so
Okay.
John,
So it does need to match.
because it's an Andy's grant, John, I could do my own, but it's just doing your own isn't necessarily a good idea. So John Aka was going to put in a correction for me so that I would show up as 10%. Besides, David's got the money I have to spend.
So we want that even for people who are not key personnel. Well, I guess, does it only matter for key personnel?
Mm-mm.
It does matter for other people.
It does matter for other people. We don't want you certifying 7% if you know that there's a commitment for you for 10,
Yeah.
or the PI is expecting you to be putting in 10. I do more than 10% here, so I know that this 10, really should be in there. The administrators for this grant know me. I converse with them. So, it just would look bad if there was a report ever sent on the Andes grant and I had this little bit amount of effort when, they talk with me and they know how busy I am for this grant. So, I mean, there are certain levels where, you've got to, get these numbers so that they're accurate. So if you do have a commitment, I'm not in the system at the UW because now we only do PIs. Initially when this started, I actually had on the books a 10% commitment, but they don't do that for co-Is or anything anymore. So it's getting harder for effort reporting because now we don't know what people have in the system. So PIs, all effort people need to know what their commitment is and try and get it right. So here, just kind of showing you, sometimes they get really messy. This isn't as bad as some, but like he's got a 0 commitment, but he's paid 10%, okay? So I put over here what he should be putting in these boxes. So he got paid 10% and he wrote nothing. You know, you can't get paid 10%. I can't let that go through, you know. You got 10% salary. You can't say no commitment. You know, here it's 1 and 1. He put 1. That's correct. You know, we can round, you know, up or down as we kind of need to, as long as it's within 50% usually. So 3 and 3, 3 is fine. You know, 20 and 20, that's fine. Here it's kind of that de minimis, you know. I'm not going to worry about anything less than 10%, so I'm still going to call this 0, so I agree with him. And we got the 5 and 5. You know, here he's got a 4% commitment, but they paid him 5, and he certified the 5, which is correct. And then here now we've got a 10% commitment, but he was paid 15, and he only certified 7. So I just don't know sometimes where people, why did he think he only had 7%? You know, why did he put that in there? So, you know, obviously, you know, these have to go back and, you know, I make a recommendation. Sometimes I just scribble all over it and scan it in and, you know, best guide to, you know, help the PIs know what to do.
So did you say the commitment is entered by you?
The university tracks that. So once a grant is funded,
Just the PI that gets entered?
just now it's just the PI. Up until 2 years ago, it was all key personnel. So now they stopped.
So in ours who aren't PIs, will that column be empty?
Your column will always be 0.
Okay.
And so you'll need to know, that's why I'm saying to you guys, you need to know, you know, what your PI intends for you to be paid, because your payroll column may not be what was intended for you or what you think your effort is. So I think everyone should be aware of what grant they work on, where are all the safety features for those grants, and how much time am I putting on each of those grants. So people just shouldn't blindly go and work in a lab and go home and come in and whatever. They need to be aware of what the question is, you know, how much time am I spending, you know, those kind of things. So these are all those little things that, you know, we want you to know and be aware of. Because you can see here, these numbers, you know, they're just kind of magic.
So Betty, when you see like a big discrepancy, then that's kind of one of our fail-safes, right? That you would, like you said, you scanned it, you write
Yeah.
all over it, and you send it back and say,
So I have 3 options. I can cancel it, which means I can deal with it later, which happens a lot. I can either process it, because it is good, or do not process, which gives me an email system to pop up right away, so I can email them saying, it's been returned, this is what's wrong,
okay.
you know. And sometimes when I go to open them, I'll get a message from RSP saying, you know, salary transfer is in the process, blah, blah, blah. So I'll have to hit do not process and then send the person a note saying, I can't process this because a transfer is pending. Wait until you see a change, wait until you see a correction, give it about 3 weeks, and let's try again. So, you know, all those scenarios are going on. And one of the reasons I do effort reporting versus being done in the divisions, they felt it wasn't a good idea to have the people who were paying the staff and the faculty do this. So it's given the department a sense of checks and balances to have somebody else who really understands effort, for one, and can go back and look at the payroll and the effort or whatever and kind of help get this right. So it gives us a little extra safety catch. So then once you add up the top, the number that goes in the non-sponsored brings your balance to 100. So people will see a number default here like 59, and they'll say, okay, well, it's 59. You know, even though I've added more up here, you know, now I have, you know, maybe, I don't know, 45 and 49. It's not going to add to 100. Well, you reduce this number in non-sponsored to bring that back to 100%. Because again, effort is 100%. And then your green light will go and it will say certify. So for PIs that are over the NIH cap, I introduced that number in the beginning, that 189.6. So if they're paid $210,000 and not 189.6, there's a little difference between those numbers and the department has to pay. But that still means we have to count for the effort on what should have been 210 versus 189. So in this case, this is somebody with a 0.5 FTE, so this is very confusing. So they should have been payrolled 20%, and they're not, so that's one thing. So they were only paid 16%. So normally they would certify or put this number at 17, but I get a special calculated list from RSP to advise the PI that because his salary is higher than the 189, he has to account for 4% more effort than what would show up in the system. So we get these numbers and I pass them along so that this is compliant with his certifying with the NIH cap issue. So, okay, most of you don't have to worry about that, just kind of an FYI. All right, so then if there is a change, this is just an FYI, there's a form, I'm the effort coordinator, I should do this, so if anybody knows of any effort that needs to be changed, you know, in the system, so this is for PIs only, I would need to know. Okay.
So like if we did a effort change letter with the NIH, then.
So yes, then that form would go with that letter that was approved. So, you know, that's why I'm involved in all this stuff continually, so. So PI can reduce his effort on a project. We've already discussed that. So if there's any significant work changes or whatever, you know, or the PI wants to be disengaged for the project for 3 months, or it's greater than 25%, this is just a reminder that, yeah, we can do these things for the PI, for the key personnel listed in the notice of award, but we must get prior approval. A letter must go to NIH. It needs to come through me, go through Debbie, go through the process. NIH will send it, and then we'll wait for a result before we make that form changes. No cost extensions. This is what I was alluding to. I didn't remember putting this in here. So it used to be, as I said, that you could put, you would commit some salary or some effort during a no cost extension. So if you were 30, you would go down to 5 or 1 or whatever. But now RSP is saying we can go down to 0. There's some new guidance that says we can go to 0. And you know, we can put that in the system, but now we've learned that we've submitted other support pages and progress reports since then, and they're very unhappy with 0 for no cost extension. So with all that said, we will have 0 in the system, but on your other support pages, put that 1% de minimis. Okay, what if we don't do all this? RSP has created ways. They have in Whisper right at the top, did you do your other activity report, and have you done effort report? So if those are no, I'm not supposed to route, School of Medicine isn't supposed to route. So it's RSP's way of catching whether the PI is compliant. And now, you know, they won't submit a grant, they won't start new awards, they won't set up accounts. So they've got a bunch of things that they do. But probably the worst thing is, so say if you guys don't do it, after a certain number of days, RSP will take your salary off the grant and put it into an account in DOM, and we will lose that grant money. So if you guys don't think that there's some effect of your not doing your effort report, that it's all based on the PI, you're now wrong. So those emails that RSP sends, that I send, you know, they're serious business, because if you're 100% on a grant and we take all, you know, $35,000 of your salary plus fringe off that grant just lost $50-some thousand, and now the Department of Medicine is got to pay it. So please, you know, take this seriously. It's a serious issue with NIH. So effort reporting red flags, you know, are there faculty that are 100%? You know, we've learned that probably shouldn't be. Are faculty being paid off of 5 or more federal awards? You know, we've got a lot of people that are doing 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%. Is this a good thing? Are they really doing it? We have to at least think about it, you know. Are they changing their level of effort too much? Does a PI put on a grant and say, I'm going to put 25% effort in this grant, and then they get the grant and they want to reduce it to 5? I have plenty of PIs doing that. So, you know, I mean, I try and hone them in, I try and advise them in advance, but these are the kind of activities that are bad for effort reporting, and we can get in real trouble. So effort certification for faculty, is it timely? Is it accurate? I mean, why did they come up with 7 on a 15% grant? I mean, I don't know. And these are smart people, so I don't mean anything. I think it's just not knowing. And then total effort commitments, paid or cost shared, you know, are they being met? And are we overall following the university's policy? And lastly, there had been a lot of fines out there. I was just leaving Northwestern 10, 12 years ago. They had a huge big thing about an effort scandal. They got fined $5.5 million, Harvard 3, Connecticut a little bit less, but the University of Florida, almost $20 million they were fined for just, you know, not following effort reporting guidelines. So it's required, we have to do it. We have a system for it. It's not that hard. We have people here to help you. I'll take questions anytime. And that puts us done for today. Any questions? Yes?
Can you go over the 1% de minimis a bit again? So if someone's asked to contribute to an award, that they might, it's something about, they don't actually have to be paid the 1%, but they can.
De minimis is not paid.
Okay.
Okay? So NIH too realized that this was an area that needed some addressing, and that's when they coined the other significant contributor. So other significant contributor is a de minimis role, and it's not paid. But internally, you know, it was uncomfortable to RSP and other schools getting money from agencies and not putting any effort down. So these little groups that get together kind of had decided that they would put on 1% on a grant and call it de minimis and basically cost share it. So that is cost shared effort, that is acceptable cost shared effort. So if we get, and not internally. Internally, I suggest people not put effort on if they don't have to. So if it doesn't require, if ICTR doesn't require you to put 5% effort on it, don't put 5% effort on it. Use that money for something else, you know. But say juvenile diabetes, you know, they don't require any effort, but we're getting a grant for them. So put 1% down and we'll cost share it. You know, it won't take money out of juvenile diabetes grant to cover that PI salary. You know, you want a collaborator, call them another significant contributor, even though it's not NIH, it's a term that they accept, and we know that that person's going to be on the JDRF grant and not get paid anything. So, you know, it's just another way of saying de minimis, but you're putting people on for 1%, you know, or not getting paid. Or if you use other significant contributor, it's acceptable to go 0 and not pay them. So either way. But a PI on a grant that doesn't require their salary or doesn't allow their salary should have 1% de minimis that the RSP will then track as 1% in the system for that PI for that grant.
We use this for like steering committee members. That's a big one, because otherwise you tie up all this effort.
Right,
And that's troubling later.
Because like NASIA, I mean, NASIA has all these 1%s, and we are counting her to that little percentage there. And we had 2 grants, we just lowered her to 0, and we submitted the other support page, and it came back, and they said we won't accept 0 for these grants. So if she was collaborating with 2 people, and we knocked her down, and they said no, so you know, she has 50% effort to give, and she's at 48. So, you know, and she shouldn't be paid 100%. So we got about 10 faculty here that just play it really close to the end here.
At night?
Yeah, so, but,
Great, thank you.
okay.
Last one.
Sure.
Is there an issue, so you said if your PI commits to NIH, you know, 20% on a grant, and if that drops, that's an issue and they should get prior approval from NIH. What if they put more effort on the grant? Is that also?
More is always good.
Okay.
I'm not sure why, but we can, you know, if a person has 20% and they say, you know, this other grant or this other whatever commitment has gone away, and I'm putting much more time on this, even as PI, they can get paid 30, 35%. So more is good,
Okay, sure.
you know, but for effort reporting, so if a person is paid 30%, they have to certify. They shouldn't go back and say, but I worked 40%, because that more isn't good, because then there's a disconnect for effort reporting between their payroll and their effort. Okay, so I can't have a number for effort reporting higher or lower than payroll.
Okay.
But salary to salary, we can pay higher, we just can't pay lower.
Okay.
Okay?
Plus effort reporting is always like the previous cycle as well, too, right?
Right, you're
So-
always dealing with, you know, in the past, because they're not asking you to say, you know, what you're going to be doing the next 2 months.
Yeah.
You know, and RSP, if they would do the training, they would say, well, we're looking at the year, so you could actually have a little less here and a little more there. But then when you actually do it, they don't want it done that way. So it's, again, it's that conundrum, you know. Well, you can average out the year, but don't really do it, because, you know, then we don't have good effort reporting. So,
Yeah.
so I just say, follow how I'm paid.
So
Follow
when
how you're paid.
Going through with the people who are less than 1 FTE, if it's VA or if they're just like 90%, 80%, we have that note in the budget justification that says 5% payrolls at 6%. Then they come through to effort certification, and basically we have to certify 6.
6.
But University understands that we're doing that even though it's 5 out of 100, but it's 6
Yeah.
out of 90 or whatever.
Do you know RSP didn't know about the MOUs until within the last couple months? So here we've been loading them in Whisper and following this, and Debbie's been making sure that we do this and whatever. And Jeff, who's our effort coordinator, just found out and just reviewed these forms within the last 3 months. Now, he thinks they're good forms, and they're glad we've been doing it, because we've been required to do it, but RSP didn't know we'd been doing this all this time. So I don't know what that means, but, you know, it's a little scary. So. Okay, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Have some cookies.